There we go. We've begun recording. Good morning and welcome to the Smarter Government series, Securing Your Mobile Cloud Environment. My name is Bob Ballard. I'm the Principal Cloud Strategist for Planet Technologies. Just a little bit about me real quick. I've been in IT for over 20 years, most of which, about 14 of which, was at Microsoft, where I was most recently the Chief Cloud Strategist for Microsoft State and Local Government, coming over here to help lead the cloud business at Planet Technologies, where I'm very excited to be. So, just some housekeeping items. You're welcome to ask questions on the IM window. Everyone is currently muted in the audience. So you're welcome to ask questions in the IM window. If they're, depending on time, we may open up the lines at the end. I have to see how we go as far as time goes. At a minimum, feel free to ask questions in the window. I've got some of my colleagues on that will be looking for them to potentially provide answers if they can. If not, I'm going to go through the IMs at the end. If there's any unanswered questions, I'm going to send them out to the group as a follow-up message, just because it's difficult to obviously answer and type and speak time. So get started. So just real quick, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the commercial for Planet Technologies. We just want to make sure that everyone's aware, and certainly the marketing folks on the call would fire me if I didn't do my quick, at least 30-second spin on Planet. So we are we're a national solutions provider for Microsoft. There's only 35 of them in the U.S. We are 4-time Windows Partner of the Year. We're a 5-time State and Local Partner of the Year, 6-time Federal Partner of the Year, and the State and Local Government Cloud Partner of the Year, all named by Microsoft. I'm not going to drill into a bunch of these, but we're over 150. I think the number's getting closer to 200 senior Microsoft consultants. Just a couple of things. Have multiple Microsoft SharePoint certified masters. There's only a handful of those in the country, really, a couple handfuls. So we actually have 3 of them on staff, as well as numerous other certifications, etc. The websites are at the end if you want to learn more about Planet. Help yourself out. Email me. I'm happy to tell you all about it. Let's get started. The in a couple of framework things. 1% of workers mix their personal and work tasks in their devices. I think we're all experiencing that issue. By the way, if there's anybody that's having trouble hearing me, please speak up or type in the IM window, etc. 61% of workers mix their personal and work tasks on their devices. We all know this happens. We all do it every day. We're among those 61% likely, right? 80% of employees admit to doing non-approved software applications at their jobs, right? So we also know we're fighting this problem as well. And 75% of network intrusions exploit weak or stolen credentials, right? So in this world where we're now allowing access to content that's sensitive data in it as government customers, we all have these regulations and compliance obligations that we have, but we also need, our constituents, are expecting, faster turnarounds than ever, higher quality services, which mean we need to be more agile in how we service them. Doing so, right, we need to enable things like mobile device access, etc. So, I've been in state and local government for 7 years, 7 or 8 years now. I guess it's 8 or 9. Wow, time flies. And in doing so, I remember just a few years ago, the concept of bring your own devices in state and local government was, 20% of my customers 3 years ago. That number has clearly exploded at this point. So, we sort of need to get our hands wrapped around that, right? So just a couple of other really interesting things around network security, right? 200 plus days is the average time an attacker is actually in your network before he, she, or it's detected, right? That to me is one of the more staggering pieces. We're going to talk a little bit as we get into this about what we can do to protect against that. I'm not going to read all the statistics on here. You guys are. I'm going to make the slides available at the end, so you're welcome to do that. I just wanted an excuse to put a big pot of spaghetti sauce in here, but I thought I'd kick off by saying, hey, there's some elements of mobile device management that are just out of the box in Office 365, and I thought, I want to talk about what's included and why it's important, why its integration with things like EMS actually really improved the story around mobile device management and your concerns. So let's talk about Just Like Ragoo. I know I'm dating myself if you guys remember these commercials, but Just Like Ragoo, it's in there. So when we think about some core things, right? So what's built in, conditional access, some basic device management, and selective wipe are sort of built in the Microsoft Office 365 um, product. And then when we start to get into greater application management, we shift into Intune. That sure looks like three things are in the product and one are not. There's a wealth of features and capabilities that are in Intune that do require Intune. But I thought I'd start off with what's built in, and then we'll start looking at sort of what you get when you layer on the additional products. So I'm just going to sort of start by, when we talk about conditional access, right? It's an interesting scenario that I think is the big game changer in mobile device management and how we look. Because what comes to me often is I get asked by customers over and over again, whether it was in my prior life at Microsoft or currently, especially now here at Planet, as this stuff is becoming more and more relevant, is, okay, Bob, why, why Intune / Enterprise Mobility Suite versus, the AirWatches and other third-party solutions of the world? This notion of conditional access and integration at the application level is where things get really interesting. So once upon a time, right, so the way that all these third-party services work is essentially in one form or another, they hijack ActiveSync, right? And the idea is the first thing that anybody does with their mobile device in your mobile environment is connect it via ActiveSync to get mail. A funny thing happened along the way as sort of the burgeoning amount of devices and the number of devices that the average person has that they may want to connect to the environment grows, is there's a lot of scenarios in which, for instance, in which we want to connect, say, an iPad, and it may not connect via mail the first time it connects, right? Hey, I already have my laptop, maybe another tablet, my phone are all syncing with mail. I'm out on the front porch. I want to look at, edit, manipulate a document a little bit. And sure enough, I say, oh, you know what? I'll just hop on with my iPad. I install the OneDrive app and I go and open it up. And sure enough, the first thing I do is in fact connect to these applications directly. So what I want to be able to do is say, hey, do you meet certain requirements when I connect to these applications, regardless of whether they're ActiveSync or not? This is going to rear its head again when I talk a little bit later about sort of comparing third-party products and Intune, because of the story about integration here and why it's important. So out of the box, conditional access like we managed, also device management, doing things like, controlling what mobile devices can connect, setting configuration policies such as, hey, you need to have a PIN, or, we need to enforce data encryption on devices. I can do things like configure policies by groups and push them out to devices, and I can get reporting on, hey, what devices are connecting, what is their, do they meet the standards at which we need to from a BYOD factor, from a compliance perspective? And I can also do things like analyze how many people are connecting bring their own devices. If I open the door wide open and I allow everybody to join, what kinds of devices are out there? What are they doing with them? What services are they consuming, etc.? So these are some out of the box stuff with Office 365. And then finally, hey, selective wipe. I tell this story, this is the key thing. So this was always important when we talked about mail in the past, but it gets more and more important around other applications such as, Office 365 data on the device that may be documents, et cetera, out of OneDrive. So the notion of, hey, I can, in fact, wipe Office 365 apps and data off their devices when they leave the company. Hey, OneDrive disappears and all the data associated disappears as well. Whether it's they leave the company and or they just miss, you get the call, hey, I left my device in Starbucks. I think there's sensitive, HIPAA or PII on there. I need you to wipe it. I know they say they have it, but I'm not confident that no one's looking at it. Can you wipe it for me? All the way up to I have no idea where it is, or they were fired today. I need to be able to clear that information off the device. Again, these are things that actually are built into the product that integrate super nicely with sort of taking the next step, which is a great segue for the next section, the next step. So how do we take those built-in services, integrate them tightly with a comprehensive solution to secure my environment, both from managing devices perspective, managing identity perspective, as well as some other capabilities, right? So, by the way, before I shift on, feel free again, if you have some questions, you can type them in the IM window, and myself or some of my colleagues would be happy to answer them if you need some further clarification. So, when we look at Microsoft Enterprise Mobility Suite, um, it covers four key pillars, right? One is identity and access management. The way that it does that is with Microsoft Azure Active Directory Premium. As Office 365 customers, which many of you I know are, you have access to Microsoft. You're leveraging Azure Active Directory as your directory service that integrates with it. How do I take that next step, open up the premium features, and leverage some of those? For mobile device and app management, which I think is a big part of the focus today is leveraging Microsoft Intune to sort of take that next step again with, capabilities building upon what comes out of the box and built into Office 365. One of the other pieces that I like to talk about too is information protection, right? Because so we can secure the devices, we can secure your identity, but sometimes there's information, particularly sensitive information, out in the wild. So we're going to talk a little bit about how do I actually put a lockbox around the information itself, regardless of where it lives, right? Whether it's on a thumb drive, on a hard drive, on a mobile device, etc. And then some new capabilities added to the EMS suite, which is threat analytics. So how do I actually take a look at what's happening in my environment, do some trend analysis, and make smart predictive, recommendations on potential threats in your environment. So the current identity reality, I love to put this slide on there because it's just got all kinds of crazy pictures going on. But it is, by the way, a big part of the reality of what most of our customers are experiencing today, right? So we have managed devices and on-premise infrastructure, and it has a whole identity structure on it. And then, as government customers, you may have a handful of these, but you have some number of these things going on. The Salesforce and Azure and Office 365 and Amazon and SAP and insert your box and Dropbox, etc. I think most of the Office 365 customers are starting to understand the value of OneDrive for business and maybe seeing less of Box and Dropbox in the enterprise environment. But there's a whole host of these, and by the way, there's 150,000 more that are not listed on this slide. So how do I try to have a unique experience across all of these? So let's have one common identity for my on-premise, my cloud, leveraging Microsoft Azure Active Directory to be the broker for those, right? So I can in fact take what's been going on in my Active Directory today, integrate it much like we are integrating it with through ADFS or through directory synchronization standalone with with Office 365, and extend that to thousands and thousands of applications as well, and have that same experience leveraging Azure Active Directory, as the Active Directory Premium as sort of the gateway to that entire experience. And by the way, layering on, additional great features like self-service password reset that works as a self-service password reset across the entire plane of these, cloud-based and on-premise applications. So, having as we look at sort of leveraging this identity foundational piece. So I know who you are, I can attach who you are, and then I can attach that to the devices that you connect with, right? I can attach that to other sort of security principles, detecting threats, etc. So, as example, once I know who you are and you're connecting via a mobile device, I can know that it's unlikely, for instance, that you're going to be connecting by a mobile device, in Chicago when you're also simultaneously connecting by your desktop in St. Louis, right? Or further apart, if you're connecting in the Soviet Union somewhere, Russia. I'm dating myself by calling Soviet Union in Russia somewhere, or in Africa, and simultaneously sitting at your desk in Kansas, right? So taking this identity, attaching it to devices, and using it to take this comprehensive, uh, analysis of your security. So, talking a little bit about the advanced threat analytics here, Microsoft acquired a company not that long ago, just measured in a matter of months ago, that had network-based on-premise network security analytics that takes really the next step. So one of the problems, so there's a couple things. I have a whole long deck on advanced threat analytics that I just presented actually the other day at a big education conference, and I only have a slide or so in this deck, but the key things to think about and why this is different is, okay, take things like behavior analytics and some of the capabilities of connecting the dots, because one of the problems that happen is, if your security is too complex. So we all know this. I'm going to flash way back machine when I was running a help desk at a hospital nearly 20 years ago. Had what I would say is an obscenely long requirement for their passwords and complex. And I was saying, the problem with that is it actually becomes a detriment to security, and the security guy was arguing with me over and over again. So I took the CIO and I walked him around the hospital, and I flipped over, and this will date how long ago this was. I flipped over the mouse pads, and the mouse pads in 70% of the cases had the username and password actually written on the back of them with a sticky, right? So we need to try to keep it simple, but keeping it simple sometimes maybe opens you to threats. So then we need to say, okay, we need to start monitoring these attacks. Okay, well, if I'm monitoring the attacks, I'll take another analogy. So think flashback when car alarms first came out and they didn't have a lot of the provisions in place to sort of stop false alarms. If we all recall, right, we heard car alarms going off 70% of the time, right? Whether it was in your neighborhood, down the street while I was at work, there was always a car alarm off in the distance going off at any time. It got to the point where no one bothered to look to see if somebody was stealing the car, right? Totally defeating the purpose of the car alarm. So let's take, so let's simplify our end user experience. Let's monitor and measure this, apply some really well thought out business analytics to say, okay, I'm going to eliminate false positives, and not just say, hey, there's a bunch of people, looking at ports on our network, right? Or there's some there's odd network behavior going on. Okay, well, let's do some correlations. What is known to be the result of that? Are there multiple instances of it? Can I tie it to a user identity? So yeah, there's somebody sending out thousands of pieces of mail, and we want to immediately stop them. But it turns out that's the community development manager for my organization, thousands of pieces of mail all the time. So that's not unusual based on that. Sort of correlate that all together and have, a more comprehensive experience. That's what Microsoft Advanced Threat Analytics are all about. So start thinking about, having a better control over managing your B2B Azure Active Directory with your B2B connector. So I can, in fact, so part of the stress around having these sort of third-party collaborative instances and leveraging other cloud applications besides some of the core functionality in Office 365, et cetera, is these users with all these other identities, right? Or we have complicated federation scenarios that require lots of integration work. Well, what if we start developing an entire directory of folks that are able to automatically integrate and naturally federate with Azure Active Directory Premium and allow me to, with named third parties, et cetera, as well as, in state government, right? Leveraging across, very easily leveraging across other entities, federal entities, other agencies, counties and locals, so that we can have a really good experience and we can, carry our federation across these. So the next piece of this is, hey, let's talk about managing our access to the information and the information itself to measure, to help understand, right? To take a look at, to help secure the environment. The reality is we're not going backwards, right? We can hang on for as long as we think we can, and maybe you don't allow, um, unmanaged devices or, loosely managed devices in your organization, or BYODs, right? And so, but that's a dying methodology. That genie's already out of the bottle, right? So how do we start to take a couple of different approaches? So I mentioned already how we can help manage elements, of the device out of the box. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, again, the scenario I sort of started at the beginning of the conversation, right? So this person, they already have a phone, they have another tablet, they have a desktop, etc. They're working, that's where they're their primary devices. They're syncing mail on all those devices. So they happen to have a personal iPad as well, and they want to quickly edit a few documents. They got a big presentation tomorrow. They're sitting out on the front porch. It's a nice day. They have it in their hands. They know they can log in to OneDrive, install the app real quick, and log in. Well, now I'm connecting to OneDrive. And in sort of the third party world, right, I'm in fact, I have not connected to ActiveSync, so I have no way to push via ActiveSync my initial policy to the device, so it connects. So here's where the conditional access piece of the built-in policy. With Intune as the sort of layered on top extra functionality approach, I'll say, hey, I require a PIN, I require this information, and here's some of the things I'm going to do, and I can push that from at any application layer and redirect them up to Intune if Intune's in play for mobile device management to say my policy. And the reason why this is important is you can't have a device that has multiple policies from the same organization, particularly on iOS devices. That's known to cause all kinds of crazy and unusual behavior, right? So I can't have sort of two policy management scenarios on these devices. It's a known sort of limitation. And so as a result, right, I really get one chance to get it right. So sort of unified approach, and now that maintains beyond just ActiveSync connections and pushes down to the lower levels so that I can enforce these kinds of things. I can in fact enforce a PIN. My colleague Matt Nevins and I were on a call, a pretty large state organization that had gone down the path of Office 365 across many of the agencies, and they were leveraging third-party solution for mobile device management, and it works fine. But one of the early connection scenarios was what happens when somebody connects to OneDrive. And we actually, at the end of the day, to sort of mimic the behavior that really would happen sort of automatically out of the box with just Office 365 even, but if we needed those extra features that they're looking for from Intune, layering on Intune, again, happening automatically, to not only install AirWatch, but another third-party directory management system, understand that people had multiple devices and multiple policies and how to distribute and deliver that. And so, to deliver that scenario, we started actually, gluing on 2 and 3 and 4 products to actually duplicate sort of what comes out of the box in the EMS scenario. So as we look forward, we connect to, so automatically, you connect to Office 365. Go to connect to Office 365, it says, hey, you have an Intune policy. That policy, regardless of the method I connected, whether that be Skype, whether that be OneDrive, whether that be OA, etc., it says there's a policy out there. Let's see if you have it. Redirects you to one Intune. The policy is applied. The policy then, from then on, that device connects to Intune to validate its new policy as well. So here's where some of the separation comes. And there's where we really start to get into some interesting scenarios, particularly in government customers, where this notion or fear of sort of leakage of data to come into play. You can start to create the concept of here are my managed applications by IT from my unmanaged applications, right? And I can separate and sandbox those out. So I can say, hey, you know, I can, oops. So I can say, hey, as this builds out, I can copy from Excel. And when I go, my slide's not building properly. So I can't say copy some data from Excel, paste it into a non-managed application. I can copy and paste from Excel to Word and then submit it. Managed applications, right? Whatever I happen. By the way, they don't have to only be Microsoft applications to be managed by Intune. I can cut and paste by these managed applications, but I can't cut and paste across them. So I can't open this highly secure document in Word, and I've got all these policies that we're trying to make sure and manage that the PII information or the sensitive data that's in there doesn't leak out, and then crack open Google Apps and paste it into a Google Apps document. It actually Intune can prevent the cross documents pasting of information. So there we go. It's actually building. So I can paste. Say I can't save it to OneDrive Personal or Box or G Drive, but I can save it to Google to OneDrive for Business. So one final piece in the pillar here is protecting the files itself, right? So when we think about most security and all the security methods and modes that I've sort of talked about thus far, right? We've talked about securing the content, the data, the connection, the entryway. We're putting locks, we're putting things in a safe, putting a great set of locks around it, whether that's biometric, two-factor, multi-factor, any of those kinds of things, right? Ultimately, once I get the data out, right, then there's nothing I can do. So Office 365 includes, information rights management or the rights management service. But once you leverage Enterprise Mobility Suite, I can actually extend that to connect both on-premise content and data with policies that I have in the cloud, right? So that I can have a singular policy that follows, end user centric around what they can and can't do with particular documents, whether they can read them or not, encrypting those documents and following it with it. So the example I use is I can have the world's most fantastic, highly sophisticated safe. Open that safe and I take the file folder out with the sensitive information and I walk the door. It doesn't matter how sophisticated the safe is. My server mechanism, the encryption at rest, in transit, all those things go away, right? The second I come out of that location. So with rights management, I get to actually, in fact, wrap up that file folder itself, right? That document itself, and encrypt it as it rests across on any device, any location, and require that you validate your credentials and that those credentials be currently valid. In a way that I can check right now to allow me to open it. So I can take that sensitive information and forward it to an inappropriate source, and it doesn't matter. They can't open it. I can accidentally leave. I can have a totally unmanaged device. Somehow I've broken 9 layers of security. Not that we can, but let's say I have. Or I used tricky methods in which to Bluetooth transfer the file over to another phone that isn't managed, and then I'm going to attach it and send it to other people, or that I just leave it behind, right? Well, in fact, I have to again provide my credentials to actually credentials. It looks like we might have actually dropped the presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and. Can everyone hear me okay? Can everyone hear me okay? Am I back? I apologize. So, okay, I'll apologize for everybody while the deck is loading back. So the idea of having the actual, um, just kind of tied up, the idea of having it viewed on any device, regardless of its policies, I can protect the most sensitive data. So the idea behind this is, hey, let's build a set of tiering, right, and categorize my risk. So, we start seeing sort of compliance policies from customers that say, hey, all content is somewhat sensitive. So we want to have all these, device management policies in place, and whether I am or not going to allow them to save that content to the local device. Am I going to allow them to cut and paste across the managed and unmanaged applications? You determine all of that as your base. But in the most sensitive content, I'm going to, in fact, set another layer up and actually protect the content itself. And that way that even if there's a way to sort of circumvent what I think is a good policy, I'm actually protected yet one more layer deep. So a key thing here is, hey, this thing is not just about Microsoft stuff, right? It's not just about Microsoft stuff, right? It works on iOS and Android and Windows, and Lord knows it'll attack the next cool flavor or something that we haven't heard of yet 2 years from now. And there are thousands of software as a service applications that integrate with Azure Active Directory Premium right out of the box, right? It actually works with, line of business applications and other applications as well, right? So it's not just the Microsoft applications. So this really is a comprehensive platform across the board. So how do these things fit together? So sort of tying it all back together again, what pieces and parts go to what? So if I'm an Office 365 customer, right, I have basic identity management. I can sign into O365 and I can use multi-factor authentication for Office 365 stuff. When I start to go into EMS, that triggers additional features, right? I've got hybrid identity management. I got single sign-on for all cloud applications, not just Office 365. I can push my multi-factor authentication that's built into Azure Active Directory into my own custom workloads, line of business applications. I can require people that when they go into my web-based HR system, et cetera, to present additional PIN connections when I connect with a mobile device. I can have self-service group management and password reset. I can write that all back to Active Directory on premises, right? I can get advanced security reports and documentation around that. So on the mobile device management side, right, we talked about that. Hey, I got device settings management, got some selective wipe, right, and I got some O365 management console, right? I got some built-in stuff. When I go to MDM for O365, right, I've got integration with current system center infrastructure, which I think is key, by the way. One other key thing that rears its head in these environments, and I was talking to a local, a southeastern school district in South Carolina, and they were really struggling with, okay, I've got students that sometimes they have a PC, and sometimes they have a Google tablet, and sometimes they have an iPad. And how do I help maintain that? Well, once I integrate into System Center, I can have a user-centric management experience that says, hey, certain settings and things, they follow even across platform. You are allowed to access this. You're not allowed to access that, right? So how do we, so a great experience about integrating with that, doing things like, prevent jailbreak prevention, prevention from cut and pasting across the unmanaged apps, and integrating in PC management as well, right? In many ways, so many of you guys have System Center deployed or other, on-premise software management, but most of those systems break down on some level when the devices are what I would say are home by not being at home, right? Their primary function is not being somewhere inside the network, right? Whether they're in police cars, whether they're at kiosks, they're in mobile remote locations that are rarely network connected, right? So, Intune has a great experience for those sort of homeless devices, right? That often rear their head in government customers, right? And then, we talked about RMS protection for Office 365, right? Is, hey, it only works when content is stored inside of Office 365. But when we look at RMS that comes with Enterprise Mobility Suite, right, we get protection for both on-premise, Windows Server files, email notifications when sharing documents. Hey, somebody shared this document. It's sensitive. Are you sure you're okay with that? Sort of the next level sort of integration. So I have a comprehensive information management policy across on-premise and cloud. So I think this is just sort of a quick illustration of sort of all the pieces and parts that come with both. I'm not going to go down all the elements, but I like to include this chart in the in the presentation. So as I send it out and have access, it has a nice way of documenting. Okay, what comes with ActiveSync, what comes with the MDM for Office 365, and what comes with Intune, and a little better breakdown of a chart, sort of comparing all the three. Since we got finished, I was hoping to get finished at 11:42, so I'm 4 minutes ahead of schedule, something that never happens for any of you who've seen me present before. So that's great. I'm willing to go ahead and unmute. Please self-mute yourselves and open up the floor to some questions via IM or via phone if you'd like. So you're able to unmute yourself now and ask a question. Looks like some folks are typing. Don't be shy. Don't be shy. Feel free to ask questions. Hop on. So for those that are saying the screen, yeah, we did move on from that. You might want to disconnect and reconnect from the meeting. We're actually at the final slide now. There's only a couple of slides that came after that sort of followed in the content I was talking about. So any questions out there? I'll give it another second. I will be making the presentation available. I'll share it and send it out to a link to all those that attended. I thank everybody for attending the meeting. Looks like we might have a question coming up.
Yeah, Bob, if you have a minute, I was just going to ask you to go over a little more about Active Directory in the cloud and how it syncs with an on-premise domain controller.
So I'll talk a little bit about what's available now, and then just give a quick little hint as to what's sort of in preview mode right now, and will be available in the not too distant future. So currently today, a question, Chuck, are you a Office 365 customer today?
Yes, we are.
Okay. So are you syncing with Active Directory now for Office 365?
We are, and we're having some issues.
Oh, okay. Well, that's so that's a little bit of a different topic. So the same model and method would be how you synchronize. How the same model you use. Now there are two. You could be using the legacy DirSync appliance, or are you using Azure Active Directory Sync, sort of the updated version? Do you know?
The former, the DirSync methodology.
So, and I'm not saying that there's a lot of known issues that are known to be on one and not the other, but I think it might make sense if you're experiencing some problems on sort of the older version flavor of this. It may make sense to in fact switch over. And Matt Nevins, are you on? Do you want to talk a little bit about, because I know you went through some customers that switched from legacy DirSync to AAD Sync. I think he's on. Well, I can take a follow-up to have he stepped away for a second. I can take a follow-up to have Matt kind of close the loop with you on that, but there is we've done this for a number of customers. It's not a lot of work involved. We'd be sort of share at a high level what it takes to flip from one to the other. I think that would be where I would start, as opposed to really putting a lot of time and effort into troubleshooting the legacy version, looking at the updated version, since they can run. It's sort of a cutover switch, right? It's not a migration of any kind.
Okay. The updated directory synchronization was called what?
AAD Sync, Azure Active Directory Sync.
Got it.
Versus just DirSync.
Yep.
And customers that were deployed, more than a year ago will very likely just be on DirSync, and there's not a great reason to, take care of upgrading until just recently. There's some new features that were added, but if you're experiencing problems, that would be a good reason to maybe evaluate that.
Okay, thank you.
So I have a question from Tom Cruise that says, do we envision, buying enough license for all users or easing into EMS with only certain users? I think there's a case, right? So the key here is, do you clearly have, I think long-term vision is you're probably going to license your entire enterprise. And, but if you have a scenario where you clearly have sort of user class definitions, right? And I know in some state government entities that's 100% true, right? Hey, I have knowledge workers, and then I also have folks that are, climbing telephone poles and repairing roads, right? In those very clear scenarios, I think, you're going to see sort of, the knowledge worker classification and the non-knowledge worker classification, and I see a split there potentially, right? But I think what's interesting is, and I think this is the biggest change that no one saw coming, right? It used to be just the core knowledge worker that was the one with the gadgets and the phones. But, my 72-year-old father has a smartphone and uses it every day, gets his mail on it. He Skyped the other day, right? So this notion that, in file that are maybe not typically at a desk, not having a device is not as likely to be the case as it was 3 or 4 years ago. And in that, from that scenario, what's really interesting about this is, let's just say I am the classic guy on a pole. Well, my only access to content ever that I may need to do might be from a mobile device, right? Because I'm rarely in front of a desktop or laptop PC, at least for work purposes, right? So if that's the case, I might want to make sure that whatever it is I access is in fact protected, right? So I think there can be a case made for it, but and easing in is fine, right? But just as long as you sort of have a base policy of the built-in stuff with MDM, and ramping up for initial workers, because one of the arguments back, and I'm sort of playing both sides of the argument so that we have the way through, is, yeah, okay, I got guys that are out there climbing poles and fixing roads, and their only access is in fact through mobile devices potentially, but they're not accessing content that I think needs to be, right? And that's the other side of that, right? So you can make a case either way, but I think overall in most organizations, I think it will be a march towards managing everybody with that, because, for example, for the identity management elements of it, et cetera, you're going to want to at least, manage everyone with that so that you can control it. To follow up on your question, it says the basic MDM that comes with Office 365 covers OneDrive for Business, right? So maybe users only dealing with that and MDM, I think I know that wouldn't cover encryption of the files. So the answer is, you're correct, right? So yes, there is some basic MDM, and you can do things with that to say, hey, if you're going to connect to OneDrive for Business, I'm going to require that you type in a PIN, and I can do some things like saying, hey, I don't allow you to sync the files to your device, right? Those things come out of the box. The second side of it is, but if I want, and by the way, rights management built into Office 365 as well. So as long as the content is living on OneDrive, I can rights manage it as well. It's that the secondary layer around, hey, I want to make sure that you're not then taking that managed content circumventing the system, right? That's where the decision gets to be made, right, on whether I think I need that, right? So the big key thing would be, hey, I'm going to access with OneDrive for Business, and then I'm going to cut and paste it into Evernote and then share it with the entire world. I've sort of circumvented the system that way. There's nothing on devices that really theoretically prevents that from happening without going to a managed application scenario with Intune. Now, granted, by the way, some of us have not had this on PCs, right? So I'm just trying to make sure you guys understand the full scope. Any other questions out there before we wrap up?
I have one more question.
Sure.
So as long as we're talking about OneDrive encryption,
right?
Okay, what's the level of security on the drive that OneDrive encryption affords us? And when I say level, I'm talking about, federal, tax information, personal, information, IRS type data. Where do we stand on that currently?
Yeah, so I would definitely engage with your Microsoft account team, not because I can't answer the question, I'm going to, but there's some processes in place that need, depending on the accreditation, there may be legal documentation that also needs to be signed to make this true, right? But from a technology standpoint, it's FIPS 140-2, right, which is FedRAMP moderate, which pretty much brings you IRS 1075 and all of those same requirements into play, right?
Right.
Now, the question, there's a couple of pieces that require action on your part, right? So that's why there's some documentation. So it's not, when it comes to these accreditations, CGIS and IRS, right? It's not just Microsoft does it, it's us plus Microsoft do it in this model. And there's some things that have to happen. So example, you say OneDrive. Well, I can sync OneDrive local too, right? That's a feature. So I either need to A, turn that off and bid it via policy, or B, require that my local drive is in fact meeting a standard of encryption through BitLocker or something else, right?
Right.
So it requires a multiple multiple pieces of the puzzle. But that's something, by the way, just, and I've tried to make this about the technology as much as sort of a sales pitch for Planet, but we actually have a packaged offering. We come in and we map all your requirements to sort of compliance actions runbook, right? Say, hey, here's what my compliance requirements are. Here's what my legal and security teams say we have to do. How do I make that happen end to end in my environment with Office 365 and Azure? Actually have sort of packaged offerings to help you do that and capture it and say, you need these buttons turned and this turned on the local machine. And then when you get to the end of that, you met your. So that's something if you have more, my email's up on the screen, but it's rballard@goplanet.com, go-planet.com. If you have more interest in something like that, I'm happy to sort of have a follow-up conversation.
Thank you.
Any other questions? We're coming up to the top of the hour. By the way, Matt, I think Matt is able to talk because I think Chuck had a question earlier. Can you talk just real briefly, Matt, about the process of converting from classic DirSync to AAD sync?
Sure. So there's really Microsoft made a pretty big line in the sand with that change in methodology. So typically the best way to do it, because I'm not sure how long ago you deployed DirSync, but typically we take that opportunity to not only upgrade the actual sync engine itself, but if you've got it deployed on an older version of Windows, if it's on 2008 R2, let's say, or if it's on 2012 and not R2, we can take the time to get that OS upgraded as well. As far as the upgrade process goes, because the data for AD Sync is really, or DirSync is really stored in 365 and on-prem, the metaverse doesn't really need to be migrated per se unless you have a very large amount of users. So in reality, it's pretty much stand up a new box and then walk through and configure the AD Sync engine however you'd like. So Bob had mentioned that there are quite a few new features in AD Sync, things around write back to your directory. So the idea of if you've noticed now, you can't do things like modify certain attributes or those types of things. So gradually, the product team is introducing new write-back functionality to do things like populate. If you create, let's say, an Office 365 modern group, the ability to populate that back into your AD with members, etc., so that it's a proper representation of what you have in 365. But the actual upgrade process is fairly simple, though something I would definitely recommend chatting about, either with Planet or the Microsoft team about that, just to make sure that you don't have any interruption in service there.
Okay, but the recommendation, Matt, is then to go ahead and stand up a new domain controller.
How many users are you syncing?
Total in our agency, I want to say there's probably greater than 1,500.
Yeah. So you don't necessarily need to, and it is supported now, but you don't necessarily need to install DirSync on a DC. It can be AD-Sync and DirSync can be on a standalone server, and it's typically the recommendation for an organization your size. But to generally answer your question, yeah, a new server doesn't need to be a DC, and then you can install AD, basically disable DirSync on the current box, and then run through the AD-Sync install. It takes about 45 minutes, and it would overwrite. It would take that process over that service, and then you can decommission the old box if it's decommissionable.
Okay. Gives me a concept. Thank you.
No problem, and feel free to reach out to Bob if you need any help with that.
All right.
All right. If there aren't any other questions, I'll give a counting going once, going twice, 3 times. Okay. Well, if anybody wants to have any follow-up, as you can see, my email is in fact pasted in the IM window. It was also on the presentation. It is rballard@go-planet.com. Feel free to email me any follow-up questions. Happy to answer them. Share with any of my appropriate engineers if I don't know the answer off the top of my head. And I'd like everybody to have a great day and enjoy yourself going into the holiday season. Thanks.
Thanks.